CAPPEM as well about some of the activities that CAPPEM is undertaking in support of PPE manufacturers across Canada. But Barry, before we get into that, first of all, welcome. Glad you're here. But maybe give us a little bit about your background and tell us a little bit about Prescient X before we start talking about projects.
Sure. Thanks, Jay, and thanks for having me here today. So my background is biological and biomedical sciences, and been in the healthcare field for over 40 years, inventing and developing new products and processes to improve healthcare. Growing up, I wanted to be a doctor inventor, and anyway, after university, I started, developing tech for healthcare, and so I've been doing that for quite some time. My passion for the last 10 years has really been on preventing infections in hospitals, and so I've done a lot of work with CSA standards for 28 years now, and ISO standards for 15 or 16 years, and trying to bring new national and international standards to bear for how we can prevent infections in our healthcare facilities. There's an engineering approach that we can take that can virtually eliminate transmission of air, water, and surfaces, disease transmission. And of course, that's all the more important now during COVID. The world has finally caught up that it is an airborne disease. And once you know that and accept that, managing the air is simple. It's sort of like what we did 150 years ago, managing water to clean up cholera. Now we have to clean up our air. And same thing with the surfaces in the hospitals. We have to clean up surfaces for other diseases. And so it's just engineering. It's not that difficult, Jay, but it's new to get that through, that paradigm change through to specifically in healthcare.
Well, I know that's a challenging sector, and maybe we can come back to some of the challenges you're facing there in a minute. I can't believe, first of all, that it's been 2 whole years since we've been, it seems to be a blur over the past couple of years responding to the pandemic. And as you know, NGen has invested about $80 million in really world-leading advanced manufacturing initiatives that have been undertaken by companies across Canada to fight the pandemic, either the development of PPE or test kits, vaccines, other components and medical devices for treatments and health and safety purposes. Barry, we launched a Disinfecting Robot Challenge in the summer of 2020, and Prescient X was awarded investment from NGen. And as I remember that project, you set up the robot. You've got Violet working very, very quickly, and through a partnership with ClearPath. Maybe tell us a little bit about that project.
Sure, and thanks for that challenge. Actually, Jay, we had been trying to get the healthcare community in particular interested in autonomous robots for UV disinfection of healthcare facilities, and so we had introduced UV to the healthcare market here in Canada about 10 years ago with a variety of products, auto UV systems, etc., and mobile devices that you would move into a patient room to disinfect. So when the opportunity came along after trying to get the healthcare community to move towards autonomous, when your project came out, that was music to our ears, and we were poised to leap at that point, having done a lot of pre-work on it. So we've developed the world's first fully autonomous, smart, aware robot that can do disinfection with UV in occupied spaces, and that is the singular differentiator. So being able to work around people and make sure that they don't get flashed with UV, but to continue your work and making those decisions just like a person would, is really the game changer for autonomous UV disinfection.
Well, that's great, and I believe Violet is on the market, and you are continuing to commercialize that robotic application as well.
Yes. In fact, we have a meeting tomorrow with a very large company, a global company, who specializes in the UV field to see how we can help take Violet global. And We've had offshoots now into other robotic applications with UV, so floor disinfection systems for the pharmaceutical industry, for example, and then sensing systems for robotics. So one of the things is really cool. Vancouver General had trained a Springer Spaniel a few years ago to sniff out C. difficile in a hospital. And so they would find C. diff in a patient room, then they would send in the UV system to disinfect. Well, we're trying to do the same thing with technology now, where we have a sentry that can sniff COVID out of the air and then send in the robot to disinfect that space.
Oh, that's great. Tell us a little bit about the role ClearPath played in the project as well.
Well, they were a phenomenal partner. They're right next door to us here in Waterloo Region. And as you know, they're a global leader and certainly Canada's leader in autonomous vehicles. And so there was a lot of customization that was required on the platform, on the base itself, to work with our systems. As you can imagine, lighting up a number of UV lamps is pretty power hungry. So we had to have a separate battery system for our piece, separate from the platform, but we had to have the two talk together and integrate together. And so ClearPath enabled a lot of things, also in the navigation, so that we get close to surfaces, close to walls. And then they also offered a high-speed fast charging system. And when you have a fast charging system, when we can, basically charge up in 20 minutes and go back out and start disinfecting again, we can get 20 hours of disinfection out of a robot per day instead of 10 hours. That's like getting two robots for the price of one.
So there's Violet, but that's not the only project that FreshenX is involved in, because you also applied and we're investing in one of our sustainable challenges, making sure that we are building up the advanced manufacturing capabilities that we need in Canada to be able to sustain production of critical products used in the fight against COVID. And you're developing materials, you're developing a new type of respirator as well.
Right. Yeah, and so so we're involved with two projects. So the development of fully compostable and biodegradable filtration materials for masks. And so we've just gone commercial actually with the compostable material. And so using agricultural products rather than oil-based products, and something that can break down over time and not pollute the planet. That's been a fantastic project. We've also discovered that we are able to get better breathability and better filtration efficiency out of the compostable materials than even with the standard materials that have been used for the last 50 years. And then our Nanomask project. Thanks for mentioning that, Jay. That is a flagship project for us. I don't know if I'm allowed to, but I'm going to show you what this product looks like. But it's the world's first elastomeric respirator that looks just like a cloth mask. And so when I put that on, it doesn't have the big gas cans on the side like a regular elastomeric, but it's fully sealed. And then you can seal it and you can make it, look like a fashion item as well. And anyway, so we're very excited by that, using the Nanomask materials that were developed, so compostable and very high efficiency and very easy breathing, and then disguised respirator now. So very excited by that one. Thank you, Jay.
Yeah, I know, and really innovative too. And look, I can vouch because I've tried these masks out, and I've got to say they are the most comfortable and most breathable masks that I've tried to date. So they're congratulations on that, Barry. So I maybe talk a little bit about the challenges that companies are facing in actually commercializing masks like this or respirators like this. But before we get there, you've been instrumental in not only leading FreshenX, but leading a group of manufacturers of PPE across Canada in trying to commercialize their products, and as they're meeting some pretty stiff challenges around standards and procurement. But tell us a little bit about CAPPEM. What does CAPPEM do?
Yeah, so CAPPEM, or the Canadian Association of PPE Manufacturers, we're a group of about 30 companies across the country that either manufacture the finished masks and respirators, or make the materials that go into them, or testing labs that are involved with, helping in the development and certification of products, and distributors as well. So they're all small and medium enterprises, SMEs, all Canadian controlled private corporations, and that's a requirement to be a member in CAPPEM. And essentially, our mandate really is to improve the PPE industry, to make it more sustainable, to develop better products and better standards, and to make sure that Canada is never vulnerable again to foreign countries and multinationals, to having to rely on them to supply PPE. As you know, when the pandemic hit, first of all, our strategic stockpile wasn't there. It had just, it had expired, and it was just in the process of actually being destroyed. So we were caught a little short, and then we just didn't have the resources in house to produce our own. And so we had to compete on the world market in a fierce competition, flying planes from foreign countries with PPE in. And, some of it was dubious quality, and there were a lot of issues with that. And the government, to their great credit, said, we will never do that again. And we want to stand up our own industry and our own standards and move forward. And so that's what CAPPEM is really all about. Companies who are committed to that sustainable self-reliance, everything from Canada, right from the raw materials right through to the finished products, and our own standards.
Mm. Well, and you're talking about standards and the whole testing procedures as well. And of course, that was cut off in terms of N95 testing right at the very beginning of COVID, as the U.S. put in new trade restrictions too.
That's right. So not only could we not buy N95s from the U.S., and the U.S. and China are the two major manufacturers of N95 respirators, but we couldn't even get our own companies certified through NIOSH in the U.S. to certify our own products. And here we are 2 years later, as you mentioned, Jay. Not one Canadian company has been certified yet to NIOSH for an N95 respirator. So, to the great credit of a lot of people in the government and Health Canada and CSA, we created a brand new CSA standard, a national standard for respirators. And it's the best standard in the world. It's a NIOSH plus, plus, plus. So better breathability, biocompatibility, strength of materials, etc. And so it's world class. And we're very excited by that, because now we can export based on quality. Having the best products in the world gives us an opportunity to sell to other countries who appreciate having really great products.
Well, what about Canada? We've got governments that are buying product. We've got hospitals, school boards, organizations, manufacturers, tech companies, all buying respirators for employees. How easy has it been to get some of these really great products onto the market?
Well, that's a tough one, Jay. It has not been easy. So there was a big panic 2 years ago to get access to product, and so the federal government, bought a lot of PPE and flew it into the country, but they also placed a couple of long-term contracts with big multinationals, so 3M and Medicom, 5 and 10-year contracts, and also gave incentives to build plants. Basically grants to build plants here in Canada to supply respirators, N95 respirators and masks. That ends up working against the Canadian PPE industry, as you can imagine. Now we have to compete against legacy companies, big multinationals, who are given free government money to build the plants and have these 5 and 10-year contracts. The same companies, these big multinationals who were set up in supplying healthcare, the other big market here in Canada, prior to COVID, were given new contracts, long-term contracts by the hospitals. So Canadian companies are essentially locked out of the two biggest markets in Canada for years to come. So, we're relying on the public right now for sales, and the public is very supportive of Canadian companies, incredibly so, and we're very grateful for that. But at this point, the 99% of the market was essentially given away for the next 5 to 10 years.
Mm. You had some good successes in the federal government, though, in terms of of procurement moving forward, and should also say, and you mentioned really good working relationships with groups like NRC and IRAP and CSA.
The support from the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, from NRC, from NGen, from CSA, from Health Canada has just been absolutely tremendous. It's we couldn't have stood up an industry like this overnight without the support of all of those great organizations, the great people. It's been absolutely phenomenal. We're very hopeful for the future here in Canada. Just before Christmas, the government signed a unanimous consent motion approved to buy Canadian PPE now for not just for the House of Commons, but for all federal departments and organizations. Now, they don't have a need for any PPE, which is the second issue, because they overbought a lot of stock in a panic. And so they have a lot of stuff to work through, and they have some existing contracts now with multinationals. So we're hopeful that in the future, if and when they do need it, those orders will be coming to us. We also have a lot of support from provincial governments. Again, originally overstocked, and most of them overstocked still, but now turning around and committing to buying from Canadian manufacturers. So I think the public and the governments are very much in sync now, but we have some legacy issues to get over as far as the supply goes.
Mm-hmm. So Barry, from your the perspective maybe of Precision-X as a manufacturer of devices for the healthcare sector, what I mean, we've talked about standards, we've talked about procurement with respect to PPE. What are some of the other challenges you see, and from a point of view also of an innovative company that is looking for partnerships, looking to scale up, from an innovation point of view, what sort of opportunities do you see or improvements you think might be made in terms of the way that that the whole environment for innovation is shaped around, and particularly around health?
Well, two things really. Yeah, no, two things really. Infection control, so infection prevention and control here in Canada, and actually around the world. It's not just here, but they are really behind when it comes to adoption of technology. They're really focused on process. They're really focused on telling people to wash their hands, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to things, innovations like auto UV in bathrooms to, keep them sterile for everybody who goes in, or virtually sterile, or technology to keep your water safe and hand hygiene sinks and the drains disinfected, all the automation that can virtually eliminate pathogen transmission. Infection control is just not on board. So the engineers have to do a better job of selling to the infection control. So there's one big challenge there. The other big challenge we have right now, just specific during COVID, is UV here in Canada. So the Pest Management Regulatory Agency here in Canada is part of Health Canada, and they regulate all the disinfection chemicals that you use. And now they've taken it upon themselves to regulate UV in Canada. There's, as you can imagine, there's just a flood of things you can buy online through Amazon or AliExpress, et cetera, that are like little UV wands and et cetera. So they don't work. They're not, they're not powerful enough to work, or they produce ozone, which is a disaster, or they don't have safeties, and people can get flashed and burned with them. So the government rightly stood up and said that's a problem, and we need to regulate all that domestically oriented UV products flooding into the country. And so they put a halt to all of that. And everything has to be registered through PMRA now. The problem is they don't have a good registration process set up yet. Not one company has been registered for one product in the last year and a half since they started down this path. And so there's a lot of great suppliers. We're one of the companies that supply to healthcare and have for 10 years that are now at risk because UV is being banned during a pandemic until the government can figure out how to. And so that's a real disaster. Upper air UV is probably the most effective mitigation engineering measure that we could take for an airborne pandemic. They've been doing that since the 1930s with TB. It's well known. It's way more effective than ventilation and filtration, and yet not one company can bring an upper air UV product to market here in Canada now because of that moratorium that's been placed on UV.
And yet, this is in spite of all of the insistence that we move quickly to come up with our homegrown Canadian technology to fight COVID.
Yes. So if you have a way to break through that log jam, that would be terrific. I'm involved with the International UV Association. We've set up a group called the Canadian UV Advisory Committee, and so it's mostly academics and a couple of people from industry with a fair bit of experience in this, and trying to work through to provide some advice to government and how we can move safely forward with some of these products that are essential and still protect the consumer from things you can buy online. So.
Right. Are there other jurisdictions that perhaps do a better job in both regulatory efficiency on one hand, but also making sure that they've got good protections in place?
Well, the U.S. So it's regulated through the EPA in the U.S. So all of our UV products are registered in the U.S. For EPA. So you had mentioned Violet. We can't sell Violet today in Canada right now because of that UV moratorium. We can sell Violet in the US. It's registered with the EPA. And so the large global company coming to see us tomorrow is a US based firm because we can sell all the violets in the world down in the US.
The more you discuss this, Barry, the more I'm thinking that this is a perfect example of where regulatory cooperation and recognition of mutual standards would be so important here in Canada. Why try to invent the wheel when you don't have the systems in place to do that? Where the EPA in the US is already doing exactly the type of regulatory protections that we need here in Canada.
Yeah, and I'm okay with going our own path as well. Just trying to do it in isolation when you don't have the expertise already is it's challenging. I think we need to have a closer relationship between industry and government here in Canada, and I think that if we can close that gap, we close that expertise gap. If we trust each other more to work together and look for common ground, Jay, we can. It'll lead to great things. I've been involved with ISO standards, for about 16 years, and I see countries like Sweden where they have a very close relationship between industry and government, and standards development, etc. And it's remarkable, So Sweden punches way above their weight when it comes to exports, when it comes to standards participation internationally, and it's because of that close relationship between government and industry. So I see it in many aspects here in government. We've really moved a lot closer with industry to work together. We're just not there all the way through yet.
Well, as I say, Barry, you're really taking a leadership role here, and we're so pleased to be able to support you in that. I know you've been very, very active in terms of the standards development, and both on behalf of Pressionex and CAPPEM, but I know that you are extremely committed to this too. So listen, congratulations and well done on all of these initiatives.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you for all your support. It's incredible the difference that support makes when you reach out, when you have a challenge to address a societal problem, and you can see innovation is the economic engine of the country, and the small and medium enterprises, as you know, are 99% of the economy here in Canada, and 90% of the private employers here in Canada. 98% of the exporters here in Canada. And so when you reach out to the SMEs like that with a challenge and people respond, we can conquer the world. And anyway, can't thank you enough, Jay, for your leadership in bridging that gap and challenging us to do better.
Oh, thanks, Barry. That's very kind and very much appreciated too. So I'm going to leave it at that. Barry, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope everybody will join us again for another one of our project podcasts on our NGen's project podcast playlist. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you, Jay. Take care.